would you have hurt those people? Why did you kill those people?
No comments. No comments. I cannot answer it at this time.
One of the most famous, terrifying and evil serial killers in the history of the United States of America. He is considered to be involved in the deaths of at least 13 people and several rapes in 1985, and he was one of the most cruel psychopaths of serial killer Richard Ramirez. Richard Ramirez's crime wave terrified California and the entire world in 1985. It had no clear signature, and its victims were men, women, and children. Age was not a factor, nor was race or socioeconomic status. It was a race against time for a young detective named Gil Carrillo and homicide detective Frank Salerno to find the man nicknamed the Night Stalker, who had baffled the police and terrorized the people. More than 35 years after his brutal crimes, serial killer Richard Ramirez remains one of the most famous serial killers of all time. Richard B. was born on February 29, 1969 and is known as the Night Stalker. The city of Los Angeles during the period of 1984 and 1985. In 1989 he was sentenced to 19 death sentences. He grew up in an abusive and violent environment, was a follower of Satan and heavy rock music, and was greatly influenced by his cousin Mike, which prompted him to begin his criminal path. He turned into a troubled young man addicted to drugs and moved to Los Angeles, where his bloodthirsty assaults and crimes would begin. After he was arrested, he became a media star to the point of marrying one of his fans. His story was translated into cinematic action in Night Stalker, The Hunt for a Serial Killer, a Netflix series released in 2021. Richard Ramirez was born in 1960. His father was a Mexican immigrant. Richard, or Richie as they called him in El Paso, Texas, received a very strict upbringing. His father used to constantly beat his mother and 4 siblings. He was an isolated and lonely child, unable to communicate with other classmates due to epileptic seizures. This frustrated him and isolated him from the rest, and also caused him a deep fear of death. This feeling later turned into magic, when he began visiting cemeteries and getting close to satanic rituals and rock music. Mike, his cousin, has always been a role model for Richard Ramirez and has great respect for him. Mike is a former soldier with violent behavior and was not punished after killing his wife. It was this fact that marked the before and after in Richard's life, because he personally witnessed how Mike shot his wife directly in the face when Richard was only 10 years old. Her blood even splattered on his face. After that incident, Richard became interested in blood, crime, and drugs. Serial killer Richard Ramirez began smoking marijuana, killing animals, and carrying out robberies and break-ins. He was also influenced by his approach to satanic doctrine, which he often bragged about in his trial and in the lyrics of rock and metal bands. However, his turning point began when he moved to Los Angeles in the early 1980s, where he wandered aimlessly for the first few years while stealing drugs. At that time, he was arrested and spent 6 months in prison after his fingerprints were taken. This arrest was crucial to his subsequent capture, once the killings and his series of brutal crimes began. After his release, he began attacking and harassing people in Los Angeles. He even kidnapped children to terrorize them for several days. His physical and mental appearance changed. He soon began to embody the traits of Satan with bad breath, a trait that defined him when he was wanted by the authorities in the summer of 1984. When Richard was 24 years old, he became a monster, committing the first of a long series of assaults and murders. His first victim was Jenny Fenshaw, a 79-year-old woman whose only mistake was leaving her windows open due to the hot weather. Everyone in the Glassell Park neighborhood was asleep when serial killer Richard Ramirez entered Jenny's house wearing black gloves and a knife to rob him. However, Jenny didn't have anything Richard wanted, so he brutally stabbed her and then sexually assaulted her. The next day, one of her sons found her drowned in her own blood. Then the Night Tracker was born, and his modus operandi made him extremely dangerous. Richard was neither methodical nor organized, had no pattern or preference, and was impulsive and inhuman. He did not care about woman, man, child, age, race, or condition. He robbed, killed, tortured or raped alike, and that made him unpredictable. The authorities were puzzled. However, he was careless and left evidence everywhere, such as his fingerprints, the murder weapon, and even some of the witnesses who saw him. He also did not cover his face, so there were many descriptions of his body and appearance. However, some time passed before he was arrested, and during that time numerous attacks occurred. From the cold-blooded shot that ended the life of 33-year-old Dale Okazaki, to the stabbing of 44-year-old Maxine Zazera, after killing her husband, who also gouged out his eyes. Serial killer Richard Ramirez raped a woman named Ruth Wilson, who later became a key witness. She shared her description and talked about his unbearable breath and mouth odor. The multitude of witnesses and evidence left behind by Richard led to the immediate identification of his fingerprints, after he left a victim named Inez Erickson alive in August 1985. After breaking into the home of Inez and her accomplice, William Carnes, who Ramirez killed with 3 shots, Richard proceeded to torture Inez until she told him about her accomplice's stash of money. Because of this, Richard left Inez alive, who reported his descriptions to the authorities. There was also a witness who saw his car and his license plate. With all of the above information, the police found his car, and once they examined the car's fingerprints, they discovered his identity. However, Richard was away at the time his car was discovered and searched. When he returned to the city, his face appeared in the news and publications everywhere, and he became well known. After that, he was seen on a bus, and after trying to steal a car, he was arrested by a group of neighbors. After his arrest, I was charged with 31 felonies and 14 murders. Despite this, he had time to enjoy the long trial and the media circus that was surrounding him. Serial killer Richard Ramirez was sentenced to 19 life sentences in 1989, although he managed to delay the execution after several appeals. In fact, Richard became one of San Quentin's most popular guests and, in 1996, married one of his enamored admirers. His trial was riddled with irregularities, despite a large amount of evidence. The jury was afraid of him, as was most of those present in the courtroom. Not only because of the things he said about Satan and his reverence for him, but also because one of the jurors was killed during the trial. A media star and social phenomenon, serial killer Richard Ramirez died on June 7, 2013 of lymphoma at the age of 53. He was cremated, as no one claimed his body. Not even his wife, Doreen Louis, a woman he met through an exchange of letters she wrote to him while he was in prison, and whom she fell in love with and married. He had a large number of followers and fans who constantly sent him romantic messages, so much so that he rivaled Hollywood stars in popularity. And here we have reached the end of the story. I hope you liked the story. Don't forget to like and subscribe.